In the words of that great composer, Stephen Sondheim, and I'm going to sing, and I have a bad voice for singing. It's a good voice. I'm not going to malign it. It works. But in his words, as best as I can, everybody says don't, everybody says don't, everybody says don't. It isn't right. Don't. It isn't nice. Everybody says don't, everybody says don't, everybody says don't walk on the grass, don't disturb the peace, don't skate on the ice. Now, I apologize for my voice, but what is this don't, no, no, no? All of these rules and regulations that religions have hit us for centuries upon centuries with guilt and misery. What is that? It's crazy, but it's also part of the amazing experience called God. This is Michael Shevack. Welcome to God Search. This is podcast number 24, and we're going to deal with the tough stuff. Okay, so we've been dealing with kind of the easy stuff. Okay, we've been talking about covenant, that amazing spiritual concept that has gripped the world for thousands of years. And we talked about the spiritual dynamics behind covenant. You have to be growing, not cycling and over 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 again, like Nietzsche's eternal return. You have to grow. You also have to flow. You have to trust moment to moment to moment to moment, perceived moment to perceived moment to perceived moment to perceived moment, because there is an order to it. An order is a nice pun in the English for commandment. We experience God's hand of time. That's God's will through our perception of ordinary flow. And then once we accept that flow is the instrument by which we can have the experience called God, well, then we just go with it. We trust it. We grow, we flow, we go. And now we have the next part, which is where all those no's come from. Don't do this, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie and perjure on a witness stand. That's what it means. All these things, where do they come from? Well, the no's, N-O, spiritually come from know, K-N-O-W. Now let's go back to the candle, which is the example we gave you last time. You are a little kid, they tell you not to put your finger in the candle. Let's not be boring. So we put it in the light socket, and the kid says, they're just parents, puts the finger into the light socket, gets a little shock, realizes two things. One, their parents had knowledge, K-N-O-W. They had knowledge, and it was real. Okay. Two, they had to learn to listen when someone said no, or they experienced something that their parents had experienced on their own, or their parents, or in some form, even before electricity didn't exist. They had to learn it. Okay. This is the transmission of knowledge conceptually. This is the foundation of know, which is N-O, or law, which ideally and spiritually comes from knowledge, real knowledge about how life works for good. Okay? That's what it is. Now, when you're sowing and reaping, as we've been talking about spiritually, and you're discovering for yourself the amazing synchronization and harmonization of all of the events in life as you're growing and flowing and going with it, you begin to notice an order that emerges. Again, order is a non-personal way of saying God's commandment. If the Bible says, I order you, I command you, or if you're looking at it from a scientific or a secular point of view, the universe or whatever this is ordered a certain way so it happens. Your skin happens to be designed or evolved to be very tender and perceive electric shocks as a threat. You're designed to know that, intimately, to know that by the way your flesh is designed. All right. This is a very important thing. So when we're talking about sowing and reaping, and a lot of times in many New Age philosophies, they're talking about infinite potentiality and anything that you want to dream up, you can dream up, and there are no limits. Nonsense. There are limits. Okay. You can only dream up and achieve and cause and effect spiritually into life what life is capable of producing. There's an order here. You can't dream up something that can't be dreamed up. I dare you right now. Dream me up something that has no reference to anything that you know of. Dream me up something, okay? Purple unicorns. Well, you know purple. You know horses and you may know unicorns, but you know it. Five-footed orangutans with blonde hair. You could dream all these things up, but they all have reference points. The question of whether or not we can actually dream up completely new realities without any relationship to other realities is, a very profound question. But, I'm an old guy now. I've been trying for years. I can't find anything that I can dream up in my little creative mind that doesn't have some kind of reference to something that I already know or learned or dreamt about or learned from other people who were dreaming about it. So there are limits to what is popularly called now manifestation, meaning the awareness that our desires and our causing and effect and our creative supernatural consciousness is capable of participating in galvanizing the forces of creation and bringing you people and places and events and conditions so that you can create your dreams. This is the spiritual aspect of covenant. It's simply desire. It's fundamentally no different than a bunny rabbit looking for a carrot. Now, in the process of covenantal awareness, where we go from spirituality and we discover its limits, oftentimes because we are in what we call bodies. We perceive these three-dimensional beings that have certain limits. We take steps, one step at a time. We take, we blink and we don't stay without blinking. Otherwise we can get, dried eyes and we can get disease. There's an order here. Okay. And as we manifest, we discover the order. Put your finger in a candle or an electrical socket, all right, or in the wrong orifice, you can cause some damage. There's an order here. And out of that order, where reality says no, N-O, where, if you want to sound old-time religious, God says, don't. Don't. Come all of these irritating, annoying moral rules and regulations that religions have hyped and abused and taught us with fierceness and evil and guilt and decimated their own credibility. So as I said way earlier in podcast, the mainstream religions that don't buy that brand of guilt are failing because they don't know what else they're teaching. Whereas the others that are keeping that same brand of heaven and hell, and you're going to be punished, and this is bad, and this is guilt-ridden, and all this stuff, they're doing well because they're not changing their brand. So this discussion is really essential if we want covenant, which is a sublime and incredible human spiritual, idea. And it's real. You can experience it. Okay. It's a relationship with divinity. on the scale that we're living in. But if we want to have that, we have to have a nice substitute for the old-fashioned guilt and misery that more traditional religions have been meting out for centuries. And it does exist, but we can't go there yet. We have to acknowledge the truth. Yes, there are limits. You put your finger in a flame, you will burn. God or evolution or the universe or reality or that, whatever you want to call it, somehow you're designed that that finger should not go into the flame for any great length of time. And it's plastic. There are certain people who have spiritual adeptness that can allow yourself to walk on coals and do all sorts of things because they build other fields around their skin to protect them from the flame. I'm not saying there isn't plasticity. I'm not saying that laws cannot be neutralized, okay? But they can't be negated. They can't be negated. So let's take a quick, painful, I apologize, survey of certain things. Coronavirus arrives at the time where there is this massive conservative, economic, capitalist thrust to regain control of an economy that is rapidly changing because of technology, that is making it impossible to have an economic system that's based in the same way on taking over indigenous people and putting them to work in factories. Okay. Coronavirus appears at that very instant of extreme excess, reveals a mind crack. And what does it teach us? It's not bond prices, it's not inflation, it's none of that stuff. Okay? It isn't interest rates, it isn't government regulation, it isn't deregulation. The foundation of our economic system is healthy workers. Coronavirus comes and teaches us a spiritual lesson. If we wanted to rewrite a scripture, we would say, "Thou shalt not." No, don't. Everybody says no. Everybody says don't. Don't mistreat your workers. Help your workers have health. Why? It's not just charity to the workers, it is common sense business because business is not based on fluctuations of currency value. It is based on life value, especially healthy workers. That's coronavirus. Okay. Economic crashes. Repeating this from an earlier podcast. If you build a stupid economic system that's based on taking defaulted mortgages that took place in an earlier administration, turning that into an investment tool, pushing government money to support that, ostensibly to give people new houses, what happens is the economic system collapses. Why? Building economic investment tools on defaulted mortgages has no life value. Isn't it very curious that the World Trade Towers were attacked at a period of time in the US after which very conservative and militant religions were pointing the finger and accusing other religions of being extremely wrong and extremely anti-God, and we received it back. Oh, this may get me into trouble, but at least I'm asking the question, as spiritual people need to do. In what way did we participate in setting in motion that event? That doesn't mean we caused it. Okay? That man flew planes into our building. He chose. He was the direct cause. But was there a spiritual lesson involved? Well, there is always a spiritual lesson involved because we live in a unity where everything is coordinated to teach us and help us grow spiritually. Those people, by the way, who accuse the World Trade Towers of collapsing because of gays in the United States miss some of the nuances because shortly thereafter, and when Katrina hit New Orleans, Louisiana, it was the gay communities in the French Quarter that were preserved, and the nice, healthy, upper middle class streets with the churches on each corner, they were the ones that were destroyed. Go figure that if it's just a punishment for gays, as World Trade Towers claimed to be. Were gays disproportionately killed in the World Trade Towers? I mean, some of this fundamentalism is just borders on insanity because it's not based on true knowledge, where there is a cause and effect, a midah keneged midah, a measured response. That which you put in, you get out in a measured way. But we're going to talk about that more. Other things that happen. Women are successful these days. They're not just bearing children as a sign of their worth. They're bearing organizations. They're bearing industry. They have, huge, powerful bases where employees, their metaphysical children, are running underneath them. Unfortunately, a lot of these women, in order to become as successful as men, which they have a certain right to do, were delaying their childbirth. Okay, they had to put their investment into their careers, and later on, they have to, borrow the eggs from some other woman, or they have to freeze their own eggs, or they have to use other forms of artificial reproduction. It's nice to have that technology, but here's a very strange situation where, in order to be successful on a metaphysical level, women are hurting themselves on a physical level. By the way, it's not a criticism. It's a statement of fact, just as it's a statement of fact that these days women are getting the diseases like heart disease earlier, that used to be the exclusive privilege of men who were overworking like dogs to take care of their wife and children. So the question, of course, is overworking. How do you work in a way that maintains value priority number one, which is health? You know, these days, men, in order to stay connected to ladies who are more powerful, what they do to keep their power, not admitting the threat, not working through it, they start to behave like adolescent men, adolescent boys. They're watching their TV. Their ladies are off earning the money. They won't marry them, but they'll live together, wasting the woman's youth because she has a different biological clock. Okay. And the men just stay babies. You'll see this epidemic of so-called ADHD. Well, where they're not using their left brain, they're using their right brain, and they need medication to push their left brain. This is a very, very common thing that's taken place ever since the culture has become more creative and less mechanical. All right, there's good things to it, good sides to it, there's bad sides to it. We can discuss that more in the future. We are sowing and reaping animal diseases like swine flu and bird flu that have never happened before on such a mass scale because we are invading ecological niches that we have no business being in to that degree. And we're doing it in a way that's raping and pillaging. So all those diseases are being released. All right. Speaking of ADHD, I have a personal theory. I'm not blaming them. I don't want them off TV. They're the greatest thing. But since they've been teaching children with fast cuts, flutter cuts, as we used to say, I used to be in advertising. I was a creative director, so I know about a little bit of film, flutter cuts, fast things. A is an apple, 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 boom, boom, the count. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Since we've been doing that, the attention spans of kids have been doing this. Is that related to the epidemic of ADHD? I think it is, no differently than an Air Force pilot who seems to innately have ADHD because they're in the cockpit in essentially a video game, being bombarded by 1,000 things in 1,000 different directions. So, out of the experience of spiritual life, out of the experience of spiritual life, that is the foundation of covenant or an alignment between you and reality, out of the experience of growing and flowing and going with it, trusting it, comes experiences that are unpleasant. And they are not just unpleasant in a vacuum. They reveal the boundaries that are built into life that we have to pay attention to. We have to pay attention to these. Same thing happened, by the way, with AIDS. There was a release of stultified, excessively prudish, and ridiculous boundaries on sexuality that were ancient from the old time religion. And then it was released. And sometimes people release so much, it creates the opposite problem. And then AIDS took place in a way that was incredibly vicious, and it ignited a rebalancing within that community. So now marriage and family is becoming the mainstay of that community as well, because in that process of growing and flowing and going with it and trusting it, boundaries were revealed from life on certain limits, on certain limits to what has been called promiscuity. This goes on all the time. It's not a gay thing. It happened in the Roaring '20s with syphilis epidemics that were unbearable. And of course, it's been that way throughout history. So here, I want to say to all of you spiritualists who will not go near religion because of all of their crap, you're missing knowledge. Correctly interpreted, you're missing knowledge. There is knowledge in that Bible that comes from centuries of human experience. It has been distorted by dumb and uninformed, power-hungry clergy. But underneath that, there is still important, incredible knowledge. Okay? Now, there is ignorance on the spiritualist side, and there is ignorance, as I just demonstrated, on the religionist side. I'm not there. Hello, I'm Michael Shevack. This is God Search. You're here to have an experience called God, and you are, because we live in America and you have freedom to explore. You're here to validate and understand personally how your freedom and the natural boundaries and the natural laws that are built into the design of life to create good work. That's what we're here for, to get intelligent spirituality that has moral fiber and moral fiber that has freedom. End of red team, blue team. They are now there to help each other. They don't have to help each other by smashing each other. They need to, as I've said many times, if I die right now, remember one thing: wherever there is a conflict, there is missing knowledge. If we search for the missing knowledge and search not to destroy the other point of view, we might get somewhere. Now, the Bible is a very, very marvelous, incredible piece of literature. It is remarkable. I take the Bible literally, which means for me, as a piece of spiritual literature that records human knowledge and human experiences in many, many ways, with statements of law, L-A-W, and stories that are lore, L-O-R-E. I take it literally. I do not take it factually. There's a big difference between that, and I think that's confused. So be very careful, though, when you just throw the Bible out. Do you have to spend another 5,000 years to rediscover that murdering people is not in the best interest of your life, let alone your family's life, let alone the society and the world that we live in? Do we have to rediscover that? Or is it such a powerful law that is built into the design of human life, if you want a civilization, that it was enshrined after thousands of years into a book, and it is such a generalized truth that it is worshipped as divine. As divine. It's called religion. Called a revelation, and it's put in a book that is a canon. Okay, we have to be very careful when we call anything divine, and that's a big discussion. Big, big discussion, especially for certain religions that believe human beings can be divine. But we have to be very, very careful when we call anything divine, and we call the Bible divine, or we say God wrote it. We have to be very careful with the very dangerous G word from podcast number 1. It was put number 1 for a reason. So out of spiritual experience comes moral experience, which is another level to the covenantal experience. Moral, from more. It's a custom that's designed to enhance and perpetuate human life. Human life. It may not be good for all life. I mean, we still eat animals. Some of us do. And if not, we eat byproducts of animals, or we'll eat plants we destroy in order to stay alive. Let's get real. Okay? That's not going to change. Even if you're a breatharian, you're destroying little atoms and, I don't know, quarks that are part of oxygen to stay alive. Destruction is part of life. Okay? But you are learning the boundaries, the boundaries. You're learning the nose, the real nose. You're learning the nose from the nose, the knowledge that is behind the know. Not the rules, not the regulations, not the interpreted traditions, which oftentimes have to change depending on the circumstances and the advancement of human knowledge. But you're learning the know that is related to the know. You're also learning, leaving the negative aside, which makes everyone angry, so I'm addressing it first. You're also learning the positive thing, okay? You're learning that certain reproductive acts produce more children and will produce more wealth and put greater desire into the system for more wealth, and that reproduction is part of the economic system. A very ancient insight. We had to learn it the hard way through coronavirus. We learned positive things like if you don't allow the ground to go fallow, that the ground becomes empty and does not bear plants. This is ancient knowledge. The sabbatical year, it's in the Bible. You also learn the value of rest, that rest to yourself and rest to servants or slaves, or back then, or rest to your animals is necessary to encourage life. So that's enshrined in the so-called 10 Commandments. Honor the Sabbath. Well, is that a religious holiday? Or is that a creational fact of life that you don't work human beings like they are mere servants whose purpose is to make you wealthy? They have health and integrity that has to be honored. Health goes before prosperity. Value priority number 1 goes before value priority number 6. So the ability to know leads to know, but in a God search, it arises from direct experience with freedom, which is the great gift of the American system and the post-Enlightenment system, where we are free to explore. And that is the difference between the religious perspective and the spiritual perspective. And they cannot at all be separated if you want a true covenantal experience. You cannot. You cannot. Now, a lot of people, we're going to not go into too much depth here, but a lot of people have the problem with how did that happen? God can't exist. How did that happen? God can't exist. How did that happen? God can't exist. And that's because these little tiny boundary problems that we have that we don't know we're doing, that we're actually sowing and reaping tiny little errors over time because we're human, that these things can accumulate. These little boundaries, if we do a boundary against another person, where let's say we overtalk them, or we take advantage of a worker, and we do these things perpetually over time. We steal a little bit by changing, what we report to the IRS. All of these little tiny things that people do, okay? They build up and they build up and they accumulate in consciousness. The general spiritual law, and we'll discuss this more in the future, is like breeds with like. And what happens is they accumulate and they build. Then all it takes is one strike of a match, and the gasoline is already there, and boom. All the person has to do is break the law of no and do it anyway, and all those gasoline fumes underneath just get ignited. That's what happened in World War II when we saw the decimation of millions of people through wholesale exterminations. All the gas fumes were there for a few thousand years. One person said, hey, yes, let's wipe them out. Boom, everything was ignited. So you have to be very aware if you're on a covenantal experience, it is not just manifestation. It is not just new age. You'd better consider old age, new age and old age, because if you just do new age, you're going to discover old age because those boundaries are built into how life works for good or the experience of God. If you just do old age, you're going to discover when you're tired of the guilt and the shame that freedom and experimentation and curiosity and creativity and individual conscience has to be part of the mix or it doesn't work. So it's not new age versus old age. It's not spiritual versus religion. It's not intuition versus logical. It's not right brain versus left brain. It is not a feminine consciousness as opposed to a masculine consciousness. It is not the blue team versus the red team. These are delusional, sick, twisted mind cracks that are turned into conceptual wars, which if we don't handle them on a conceptual level, they turn into actual militarized wars. And as I'm speaking, the possibility of nuclear wars, which are utterly ridiculous because, there won't be anything left to fight over. So covenant is a magnificent thing. There are many levels to it. I could speak endlessly about them. It opens a lot of questions, which if you have them, go to yourgodsearch.com, and open up a conversation with me. I am happy to answer these questions. They are painful. They're part of the love that you can experience from the spiritual experience of growing and flowing and going and knowing. But they're also part of the tough love that happens when you begin to witness the boundaries that are in creation and that they're tough. And if you don't pay attention to them, sickness, disease, lack of prosperity, all of the uncomfortable, unpleasant aspects of life surface again. And you have to, if you don't follow the Bible, you'd better write one fast to teach the future generations how to avoid things. And that is why I went over value priorities and relationship priorities first. Even though you're supposed to learn them out of the covenantal experience, and you'll get it out of the fluidity of the human experience, and the moral lines will surface. Even so, there's no reason, if you're learning through God's search about the experience called God, that you should do so in a way that doesn't minimize the harm, minimize the hurt. So I gave you some basic boundaries, distill them down to 12. 12 is a nice symbolic number, the number of disciples, the numbers of tribes, the number of constellations. I like the number 12. It's a very, very nice number. So I gave you the value priorities and the relationship priorities to make the sowing and the reaping, that is part of the spiritual aspect of covenant, make that easier and more directed, so that when you begin to experience the tough love, not just the love, but the tough love that comes from moral awareness, you will suffer less, because you will not have been as clumsy in sowing and reaping your dreams. And you can have your dreams. That is what covenant is about. Covenant is about a magnificent universal movement of peace, harmony, justice, and prosperity for all the peoples and all the people and all the persons individually in existence. It's an incredible spiritual movement. It is the original spiritual movement, okay? Before it became religionized and everyone went crazy from all the guilt, and then they turned it into a science fiction movie where everything is matricized and everything's the matrix and it's just a computer simulation and there's no blood and flesh, okay? Covenant is magnificent, but you've got to learn it dynamically and with free will, which is your legacy here. And it's the legacy and the great gift of the Enlightenment through America and the great freedom of America that has never known a king, to release to the world with that degree of unstructured chaos, individuality, more important than government, more important than religion, but not without boundaries. The Constitution talks about the common good. That's the boundaries we're talking about. And we're going to continue this discussion next time on God Search as we go from the spiritual aspects of covenant to the moral aspects, which we've just handled in abbreviated form, of course, to the next dynamic aspect of covenant, which is history. History. It's not just your manifestation. It ain't just your dream. It's mine too. It's everyone's. Thanks for being here on God Search. I'm Mike Shevack. Uncover God, discover God, and for heaven's sakes, enough with this ridiculous war between spirituality and religion. Let's recover the truth through spirituality and freedom, cautiously applied with value and relationship priorities, and re-educate ourselves in the moral boundaries that are necessary to rebuild our lives, our families, our community, the nation, and the world without the mistakes of the previous stage of religion, nor without the mistakes of the previous stage of the correction of religion, which was excessive spirituality that bordered on what is called old-time paganism, to be distinguished from new-time Wicca and other pagan practices, which are very, very beautiful and support nature. We'll talk about that. So anyway, thanks for being here for God Search. Michael Shevack again, podcast 24. My God, how we are growing fast. And I'll see you next week, 5:45 Eastern Standard Time. God bless. Go to yourgodsearch.com.